A large cache of Guantanamo legal defense documents disappears from Department of Defense computers. As a judge orders the delay of one of the military hearings, questions are once again being raised over the conduct of the trials. Plus, a new investigative report reveals that US officials have misled the American people about the drone war in Pakistan. Who is really being targeted and killed? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. A week-long hearing in the case of the man accused of masterminding the USS Cole bombing in 2000 was due to begin in just a few days. That trial has now been delayed after his defense revealed that thousands of legal documents had vanished from what was supposed to be secure Department of Defense servers. It's just the latest in a string of alleged breaches of confidential communications. Defense attorneys also accuse officials of mishandling more than 500,000 attorney-client privileged emails. And earlier this year, it was revealed that there were listening devices disguised as smoke detectors in attorney-client meeting rooms. Military officials subsequently insisted that no one had listened in. Now, in the light of the latest revelations, the defense lawyers for those accused of taking part in the 9/11 attacks have also asked for a delay in their hearings. I'm joined from Indianapolis by Richard Carman. He's a lawyer representing Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri at the Guantanamo military tribunals. And here in the studio, Morris Davis. He was chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay from September 2005 until October of 2007. Richard Carman, first of all, what exactly happened to your documents?
Well, we don't know. What we do know is that somebody, some agency accessed defense computers that were supposed to be secure. Documents were gone, then they would come back. Some were completely deleted. We know that 7 gigabytes of documents have disappeared. The government doesn't know where they went. They don't know from what team they came or what teams they came. We just know that there are some very, very troubling things that have happened to the defense server. In the Nashiri case, for example, a file disappeared for a week and came back into the server but had a somewhat different name, something that is extraordinarily troubling.
As far as we know, has any other information gone missing or had this kind of occurrence occur to it that hasn't been connected to the defense case at Guantanamo?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Everything that seems to have happened, all the irregularities with respect to missing information appear to have affected only the defense.
And we did ask for an explanation from the Department of Defense, and they just basically said that we don't comment on cases that are subject to current litigation. I don't know whether you've done any better. Have you got any response from the DoD?
Well, they filed a response to our motion for continuance yesterday, and their response was actually answering a question that we've never raised. Their response was, well, the prosecution never got any improper information. That's not really the issue. The issue is, where is this information going? Who's accessing it? How's it being accessed? So while they've responded, the response really didn't address the central issue.
That's really interesting, because I mean that reminds us then of when the proceedings were cut in court at one point, and it didn't necessarily have anything to do with the prosecution, but it was just it later turned out just to be the CIA monitoring proceedings themselves.
Yeah, I mean you're seeing the same situation over and over again. The prosecution says we don't know anything about recording devices in the attorney-client rooms. We don't know anything about how defense documents are disappearing. We don't know anything about this. We don't know anything about that. But these very, very troubling things are still occurring.
Well, and so 500,000 defense lawyers, on top of all this, defense lawyer emails were, quote, mishandled, it was reported. What does that mean?
Well, what happened was, pursuant to a search that was ordered by the Court of Military Commission's review, a search that was only supposed to be of prosecution emails, looking for very discrete information. Ultimately, 500,000 internal defense emails, say from one defense lawyer on the Nashiri team to another, or a defense lawyer on the KSM team to another, somehow were turned over to the prosecution. Now, I don't want to suggest, because we don't know at this time, that the prosecution mishandled those. But what we do know is that the defense never was aware this search was going on. And the way this search was conducted, there could be hundreds of similar searches to other agencies where defense emails have been turned over. We just don't know what the full scope of the intrusions are.
And briefly, there was another report that the internet searches of the defense team were being monitored. How do you know, and what does that mean exactly?
Well, what happened is that an analyst was contacted by somebody who said, I noticed you have accessed these particular documents. Why are you doing this? And when the caller was questioned, who are you? What are you doing? It was a person whose job was to monitor the activities of the defense teams to see what work they were doing. Incredibly improper, incredibly intrusive.
So they just admitted it
again,
then? I mean, they were quite open about it.
Yes, this was their job.
And so was there any official explanation for that?
The official explanation for that and the government's response is, well, we have the responsibility to protect national security, so of course we're monitoring these things. This was an issue re-raised in the Nashiri case some time ago, and the government really dismissed it out of hand as being something that was the stuff of fantasy. But now we know it's the stuff of very, very harsh reality. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to bring Colonel Davis into this. I mean, clearly these military tribunals have been, you know, relatively ad hoc. They run in many ways under their own rules. Do those rules include the sort of privileges we would expect an attorney to have with his client or with her client, and the amount of confidentiality that we would expect on the mainland?
Right. Yeah, the rules, the military commission rules don't specifically address it, but the rules that apply to attorneys, the rule of confidentiality, attorney-client privilege, aren't waived by going to Guantanamo. So it's the same rules that should apply in any court that has the U.S. name on it.
Well, I mean, as a former prosecutor, Colonel Davis, help us understand the seriousness with which these hearings are undertaken. If this is simply negligence, perhaps help us understand the level of competence that's being employed in these trials then.
Well, it's been a parade of negligence. I mean, if you look back at the last several hearings at Guantanamo, we've had the issue of the secret recording device in the interview rooms.
Does that sound like negligence to you, though?
Well, no, that sounds like deliberate. That doesn't accidentally just show up by happenstance. Files can disappear by equipment failure or neglect. Planning a listening device takes some active effort. But you've had that. You've had the listening in the courtroom to the conversations there. You had the CIA or whoever it was that interrupted the testimony. You had a day spent arguing over whether KSM could wear camouflage to court. Issues that don't come up in federal court, because this really is, as you described it, an ad hoc process where we're trying to make up the rules as we go.
Richard Carman, what happens now then? Is there an attempt to get all of the hearings suspended? And frankly, even by the tribunal's own rules, do you think it's possible for a fair trial to take place now?
Well, to answer your first question, we need to solve this problem. Colonel Davis is absolutely correct. We have to have privacy. We have to have attorney-client material be protected. The system simply can't function in the absence of that. In order to solve the problem, we have to know what the problem is. That's going to require the government to be forthcoming. And I hope they will be, but history seems to indicate that very often they're not genuinely forthcoming. Additionally, we have to put in place, and the Chief Defense Counsel has asked the government to put in place procedures satisfactory to the defense to make sure these problems are solved. If the problems are solved, the proceedings can go forward, at least until we have the next problem. Because I think Colonel Davis, grasped the problems. We've been fighting now in the Nashiri case for 18 months, and we're just beginning to try and understand what the rules are. These are issues that would never come up in federal court.
But do you think but do you think that the trials have already been compromised, though? I mean,
well, certainly, if it were demonstrated that confidential defense information was not negligently lost, but went to some governmental agency, not the prosecution, but some other governmental agency, that would be a very, very serious problem that, in our view, would mean that the proceedings would have to be what we call abated or stopped.
Richard Kalman, thank you very much. Colonel Morris Davis, thank you as well.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
US President Barack Obama and his administration have always insisted that the CIA's drone strike program has only targeted high-level al-Qaeda leaders and affiliates who pose an imminent threat to the United States. But a new investigation has revealed that many low-level operatives and people only thought to be associated with armed groups have also been killed. The McClatchy newspaper group's examination of classified US intelligence reports is the first independent analysis of the administration's internal accounting of drone attacks since they began. And it found that of the estimated 482 people the CIA killed in the 12 months leading up to September 2011, at least 265 were not senior al-Qaeda leaders. 43 of the 95 drone strikes in the same period hit groups other than al-Qaeda. The reports also estimated that there was one civilian casualty during that time. Joining us is the investigative reporter behind that McClatchy investigation, Jonathan Landau. Also, from Stanford University, we're joined by Omar Shakir. He's the co-author of Living Under Drones, a study into the impact of US drone strikes have had on Pakistanis. And Colonel Morris Davis remains with us. He's the former chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay. Jonathan Landau, first of all, then, what exactly were you able to access and study?
Well, I can't tell you.
I thought you might say that.
But nevertheless, it was internal, it was U.S. Classified intelligence reports that made it very clear that the administration, in the limited amount of discussion, speeches, limited testimony that has been had on Capitol Hill about the targeted killing program, has been economical with the truth about who has been struck. And that's what really leapt out from the material that I had access to.
So when we read out those numbers, this is simply a specific time period in a specific location. It doesn't, it's not the totality of drone strikes.
No, and I point that out in the article. But the important part of it is that this was a period that was the most intense of the drone attacks in the tribal areas of Pakistan, and it coincided with the surge in U.S. troops going into southern Afghanistan at that time.
So 265 of those killed were not senior al-Qaeda leaders. Who were they, then?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, according to the materials that I had access to, they were militants. They were people who the CIA believed were dangerous to the United States, or conversely dangerous to Pakistan. But it's beyond that I can't say.
But are there other documents that might have more information about who these people are, or is this it that you...
I don't know. It's very hard for me to say. I can't tell you.
The question is, do they know who they're killing, I guess?
Well, I think, in the same period from open sources, we know they killed 6 senior al-Qaeda leaders. These are people who are very dangerous, not just to the United States, but to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and other countries around the world. The question is, who else was the administration going after? Who else did the administration give the CIA authority to go after? Now, from all of the comments that have been made on the record by President Obama, the Attorney General, and the CIA Director Brennan, before he became CIA Director, they were consistent in saying that these strikes were aimed at senior operational leaders of al-Qaeda and associated forces who were plotting imminent attacks on Americans, on American targets,
actually,
on the United
let's
States.
listen to some of how President Obama's own words actually on this topic right now, in fact.
This is a targeted, focused effort at people who are on a list of active terrorists who are trying to go in and harm Americans. Drones are one tool that we use, and our criteria for using them is very tight and very strict. It has to be a target that is authorized by our laws. It has to be a threat that is serious and not speculative. It has to be a situation in which we can't capture the individual before they move forward on some sort of operational plot against the United States. Our goal has been to focus on Al-Qaeda, to focus narrowly on those who would pose an imminent threat to the United States of America.
So, Colonel Davis, though, from Jonathan's reporting, it would appear, well, what does it appear? That, I mean, the President Obama is saying that. Is he knowingly misleading the country and the world?
Well, they're very careful in how they choose their words, and they tend to paint this under the law of war, that you can attack enemy combatants and we're justified in acting in self-defense, and they totally disregard that the law of war doesn't apply to the CIA, which is a civilian agency that's not governed by the Geneva Conventions. And so to target these individuals, he mentioned in the piece there that it has to be consistent with U.S. law, which is well and good, but we're killing people in other countries.
But even beyond the international law and the laws of war, we're talking about the administration's own legal justification for killing and their own criterion for killing, which doesn't seem to be being met, according to Jonathan's reporting.
Well, and they've been extraordinarily secretive about what their criteria is, that they say, trust us, we're complying with the law, but we can't tell you what that is.
Omar, it might not be a bad idea, actually, just to quickly remind ourselves of what that authorization is to kill people around the world. And it still is, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong in a moment, the authorization to use military force that was passed by Congress after 9/11. That appears to remain the legal justification despite any amendments we might have heard. So that gives the President power to use, quote, all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons. Omar, I mean, that remains the basis? I mean, we hear about Al-Qaeda or associated groups and imminent threats and all these other terms. But isn't that basically still the basis?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are two authorizations for force, one under U.S. law and one under international law. Under U.S. law, the AUMF remains the principal legal document, which really limits the United States to those actors that are related and were involved in the 9/11 attacks. And I think the reporting that was done by McClatchy here, and I think the investigation by the New York Times this past weekend, raises a real question about the extent to which current U.S. drone operations are focusing exclusively on those that were involved in 9/11. I mean, we know, for example, that Nek Mohammed, the first person who was killed in a U.S. drone strike in Pakistan in 2004, was a tribal anti-Pakistani government leader and was not directly connected to the 9/11 attacks. And so under U.S. law, I think there's reason to question whether or not current operations are maintaining true to the words of that piece of legislation. But under international law, of course, there are additional tests and additional questions, and it's not clear, given the information out there, that U.S. operations have been keeping with either the laws of war or human rights law.
But there are two issues there then, Jonathan. I mean, it's not just then whether they are expanding who can be deemed a militant because of their actual militant activity. Maybe these are anti-Pakistani militants, not necessarily anti-Al-Qaeda militants. But also the fact that many of these people may not have no connections to militancy at all. There is that Obama rule, of course, that any male over a certain age is considered a militant unless posthumously deemed not to be. And again, that wouldn't seem to be authorized legally either.
We know of circumstances where that has happened. There's one where 2 days after Raymond Davis, the CIA contractor, was released, which hit a crowd of tribal elders that allegedly, at least according to the targeteers, were militants, but turned out to be precisely that, tribal elders. So there's no question about that. But all I was trying to do is call attention to the fact that the administration says one thing, that they're going after senior al-Qaeda leaders, senior leaders of whatever associated groups, because they've never really defined the associated groups. And in fact, they've been going over after lower level militants from bad groups. Let's not get this wrong. From the Haqqani network, from a faction of the Taliban, Pakistani Taliban, that's been going over the border to participate in actions against U.S.-led forces there under the late Commander Nazir. Sorry. But there have also been strikes against unknown militants, unknown foreign fighters, and these simply don't fall within the criteria that the president and his top lieutenants have enunciated.
Right, but Omar, let's pick up that other story, the other part of this, though, which is something that you've done a lot of work on, in that they may not be Pakistani militants at all. You know, the concept of signature strikes, the concept of double tap strikes targeting, humanitarian workers, frankly, it would appear from some of the research that we've seen and that sort of thing. I mean, that also has to be taken into account, too, as we look at what exactly is governing who is being killed by the Obama administration.
Absolutely. I mean, if we put together the various reports and studies that come out, we know there are two kinds of drone strikes. Strikes that target based on patterns of behavior that the U.S. government believes is associated with militancy, or signature strikes, and then personality strikes, those that target particular individuals. But even within personality strikes, as this important McClutchy investigation suggests, we're not always targeting those that are imminent threats under international law. We also know from reports that have come out by the Congressional Research Service that the United States has used drone strikes as a measure, as a way of pressuring or messaging to the Pakistani government. We also know that even when the United States does target particular leaders, there's been faulty intelligence. I mean, we've talked earlier about Guantanamo Bay in this segment. 92% of those in Guantanamo Bay were never found to be members of Al-Qaeda, and we're relying on the same information to kill people. So, I mean, I think, Jonathan was a bit generous in saying that the U.S. government has been economical with its use of the truth. I mean, if we really look at signature strikes, which are more and more where the U.S. government is going, if we look at the faulty intelligence, if we look at strikes that target first responders, or those that target schools and other areas where there's significant numbers of civilians, there's substantial reason to doubt whether or not current operations comply with international law and whether they're actually effective in maintaining U.S. security. We only have 2 minutes left, so I just want to get through a couple of points quite quickly then. Jonathan, the CIA says from its own documents then that in that time only one civilian was killed. That's an estimate. Right, but doesn't that suggest that maybe even beyond the CIA misleading the rest of the public, allegedly, on the capability and precision of the strikes and how these matrices are built up as to who they're killing, the disposition matrices and things which appear to have been thrown out the window, that they're lying to themselves perhaps about how many civilians have been killed? I can't tell you because we simply can't get access to that kind of information. Right. Colonel Davis, now that the U.S. is on this path, what about international precedent then? I mean, is the U.S. prepared for everyone else doing this stuff, for China, Russia, Syria?
I don't think so. I mean, it's great being the big kid on the playground, the only one with the technology and the will to use it. But we're setting a precedent for this new technology, this new way of waging war where you can sit 7,600 miles away in Nevada in an air-conditioned trailer in a comfortable chair and kill people 7,600 miles away in Pakistan. But we're setting a precedent that we're going to have a hard time objecting to with a straight face when others have this capability.
Jonathan Landy, the administration tends to go after anyone shining a light on these sorts of secretive practices. Do you fear prosecution now? Absolutely. Yes, I do. But, you have to go and look at the totality of the history of this kind of story, and you can go all the way back to the Nixon's secret bombing campaigns against Laos and Cambodia. You can look at the use of the CIA to monitor Americans under the Nixon administration. You can go and most recently look at the way the former Bush administration used allegedly top secret intelligence, which much of which was bogus and some of which was exaggerated, to justify the invasion of another country. So, as a journalist, one has to weigh all of that against the fact that this information... Yeah, but the difference is in the past, the journalists who uncovered that information were rewarded. Now they're prosecuted. Well, they are being prosecuted, and the fact is that, you can't hide a drone strike. It's not... I don't think I gave away any
information that will jeopardize U.S. national security. I think that should be the measure of whether or not they decide that they would like to come and take legal measures against me. I think if you read my story, basically all I'm doing is confirming what was already known.
Jonathan Lanty, thank you very much. Colonel Morris Davis, thank you. Omar Shakir, thank you very much as well. That's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.